Hello everyone, we are here again with another podcast AMA. So we'll do some introductions. So I am Daryl and I'm the marketing manager here at Podcast.co.
Yeah, and I'm Laura and I'm customer success manager at Podcast.co. A lot of you might have spoken to me already somehow.
So if this is your first time joining us, what we tend to do is we'll just start off with a demo of the platform. Laura will take you through all the different features of Podcast.co. And then we will start answering some of the questions that you've been sending us. Cool. All right, so should we just get started with the demo then?
Yeah, absolutely. So hopefully my screen is on screen for all of you guys right now. So this is just a little demo example account that I've got set up here. And what I'll do is I'll take you through all of it. And then if you have any questions, feel free to ask them in the comments and we'll be fired some of those through and we'll take some of those at the end. So first thing you'll see here is the home page, and this just kind of gives you a general overview of what's going on with your podcast. So on here you have things like how many episodes are currently live, your monthly downloads and your monthly unique downloads. I'll explain the difference between those two in just a sec. And then also a graph that shows your estimated subscriber count here as well. And obviously that will adjust and change with everything as time goes on. The difference between the monthly downloads and the unique downloads, because I get asked that one quite a lot. Monthly downloads counts every single download from your RSS feed, and unique downloads counts every single IP address, so every person. So the example I give usually is if I was to download an episode of your podcast 4 times, monthly would show 4 and unique would show 1 because I'm one person. That's the easiest way of explaining it. And also when you first sign up, you'll get a little checklist down the bottom here like this that just shows you what you should be looking at doing next in terms of getting your podcast up and running and chugging away. The episodes tab is pretty much the one that you're going to be spending most of your time on. So this is just self-explanatory. It's where all your episodes live. And this is split into 3 different sections. So you can see them here. Published is everything that is live at the moment. Those are all the episodes that are displaying in all the different directories. Your listeners can access those, listen to them, download them, and all of that jazz. Scheduled is any episodes that you have scheduled to automatically publish at a later date and time. So that's pretty good for if you want to record 10 episodes in bulk and then schedule them up throughout the course of a couple of months. And then that just gives you a bit of breathing room to go away and create some more content and get that scheduled up for the next lot of stuff that's going out. And then unlisted is kind of like a drafts box. So anything in here isn't publicly available. The only way you can access things that are in here is with the direct link to the episode that's in here. So the most common thing we see people use this section for really is if they have maybe an episode where they've interviewed someone that needs to approve the content that's going out beforehand. They'll pop it in here, send the person the direct link to the content, then they can check it over, make sure everything they've said is okay. And once they've given you the okay, you can move that into published or scheduled super, super easily at just the click of a button. So it's pretty easy. In terms of uploading episodes, you can click and drag a file into this window and it will start uploading, or you can click this upload episode button at the top here and that'll just open up your file finder and then you can find the MP3 in there as normal. Once it's uploaded, you get a little window like this, so you can enter the episode name, bit of a description, the number for the episode, all that sort of stuff in there. And then once you've put all of that information in, it will open up this final window here. And this just allows you to select where you want your podcast to go. So public is live straight away. So it goes into that published section I showed you before. Scheduled is if you want to schedule it for a later date and time. So there's a couple of presets here, or you can select a custom date and time by using the selector there. And that will schedule it out. And unlisted is on there as well if you just want to throw it into unlisted for now instead. So that's kind of the brief rundown of the episode section. A couple of extra bits before I move on. You do have these buttons on the end here. Share episode just gives you a couple of different ways of sharing your episode out. So that's things like the embeddable episode player, a direct link to the episode, which I'll show in more detail a little bit later on. And the audiogram feature lives in here as well. So that is essentially a little feature we've got in partnership with Headliner that allows you to create sort of graphic style videos of clips of your podcast or the entire thing if you want to put it on YouTube. And it just gives you a unique and different way of sharing out your podcast content on social media that's a bit more visually engaging. You also have the episode analytics in here. So these will not be very, these won't be very big numbers in here because this podcast is not public. But you get the general gist. It shows you the total and unique downloads for any day during the period of time you have selected up here. So you can select any one of these presets, or you can click a custom start and end date and it will adjust in the background for you. You have two graphs down the bottom as well, just showing where those listeners have come from and what platform they've been using to listen. So that's usually things like Apple and Stitcher and all of those. Obviously, as this one isn't public, we've just got Chrome and Podcast Player at the moment. And then right on the end here, this is just kind of miscellaneous. Edit is if you need to edit anything to do with the podcast information, it brings up that little box I showed you before. Replace media, if you accidentally upload the wrong file, you can click that, put the right file in, and it will adjust on all the different directories as well. Move to unlisted, exactly what it sounds like. If you've accidentally whacked an episode out too early, you can shove it straight back into unlisted and correct that little mistake there. Transcription feature lives in here as well. I won't be able to show you that in great detail at the moment because we do have a limited amount of time, but that's just for transcribing your episodes. If you want more information on that, we do have articles on the blog and also a help guide in the help center. And download is just if you need to download a backup copy of the episode as well. Moving on, analytics, I'll sort of whiz through this one because it's kind of the same as the episode analytics I just showed you, but this time for the entire podcast. So same date range selector up here with the same presets or custom range selector here. You've got the same graph here showing total and unique downloads for any day during the period you've got selected. And the same graphs down the bottom showing where your listeners are coming from and what they are using to listen to the podcast, but you also get a bonus extra graph that shows you what your most popular episodes during that period have been. I believe that shows the top 5 episodes for the period. Obviously, as this podcast only has a couple, it's only showing one. You can hover over those as well to get an actual number and percentage for those download numbers as well. Settings is sort of the secondary area we recommend coming to as soon as you've set up your podcast initially. Come in here and make sure that this section's set up because there are a few things that can cause some issues if they're not set up correctly in this section. So I'll get to those in just a sec. But in basic here, you have all the basic information about your podcast. So if you need to update the artwork, you can do that in here. If you need to update the description, you can do that in there too. And we recently split up the categories as well. So you can select a primary category that you want your podcast to be in. So that will be the main one that you are guaranteed to be in. And then any subcategories can go in this extra box at the bottom here. Advanced is where that's the section we really recommend you go to once you've set up your podcast initially. So bits and pieces in here that can cause issues if they're not set up correctly. Time zone is the biggest culprit. If this is not set to your time zone, the scheduling feature will not work for you. I accidentally had this set to an American time zone once, tried to publish an episode at 8 a.m. and it went out at like 2 a.m. or something like that. I can't remember. So definitely worth making sure that one's in check. And also making sure you have an author name in this field, which I don't, oops. But if there isn't an author in that field, it will default to take the name that you've applied to your account when you signed up for Podcast.co. So if you're wanting to have a specific name or a specific company name, it is well worth double checking that that field is filled in. Otherwise, it will display as whatever name you signed up as. And then just making sure these little content bits at the bottom here match up with what content you're putting out. So whether you're doing it in seasons or episode by episode, the language of the podcast, and whether the podcast itself is explicit or clean. If you're only going to have a couple of episodes that are explicit, you can apply the explicit filter to those specific episodes and leave the podcast itself clean. If it's going to be majority of episodes, I'd turn it on for the entire podcast just to be sure. And on the business plan, we do now have the ability to turn the Podcast.co branding off for the embeddable players and the podcast pages as well. So that's just this little switch here. But as I said, that is only on our business plan. And finally, we have the share and publish section, which is another big one. So I'll try and go as fast as I can, but give you guys all the info. So in here is where our distribution feature lies. This is a big part of where a lot of questions usually come from. So if you have any questions about this section, feel free to leave them in the comments and those will get passed to us afterwards. But essentially, if you want us to distribute your podcast, you just come in here once you've got at least one episode live and you click distribute my podcast. That then sends a distribution request to our submissions team, and they will take over that and start sending your podcast out to all those different platforms. The whole process can take up to a week. So if you've got a launch date in mind, just bear in mind that the initial submissions process can take up to a week to go through, the main culprit for that one being Apple Podcasts. You'll also get email updates along that process as well. So you'll get an email update when our team pick up your request and start working on it. You'll get one sort of in the middle when we've got them sent everywhere. We're just waiting for the different directories to approve. And then you get a final one right at the end with all of your links on it that tells you that we're all done. So you can go and check those out there. If you'd rather we didn't do it and you prefer to manage that process yourself, that's totally fine. You just click the I prefer to manage this myself button. That then collapses away. And you've got your RSS feed just here, and also all these different boxes here to pop your links in once you've got them back from the directories, and a little click through to our help guides on how to submit to all those different places as well. The embeddable podcast player lives in here as well. So this is just the embeddable player for the entire podcast. You remember we had the episode players before. This is just one that has the entire podcast on it. So if you just wanted one web page on your website with the whole podcast on it, you could use this. So it looks a little something like this. You can change the theme of this between dark and light. You can change the color of these buttons on the player to whatever color you'd like using the hex. So if you've got a branded color, you can just type in the code there and it will adjust for you. And you can change these buttons between rounded off and squared off as well, depending on what you'd like. And down the bottom here, you've got the options to turn downloads, sharing, and subscriptions on or off, depending on what you want people to be able to do using the player. Most people just leave all three of those on, to be honest. The podcast page is a web page that we provide for your podcast. So it's just sort of like a little landing page. I shall preface this just by saying we are currently working on an updated version of podcast pages, which is really exciting. We just got some of the new designs back for those relatively recently, and they look pretty good. So that's an exciting update that's coming your way. But for now, they look a little something like this. So you've got a banner image at the top here. That can be whatever you'd like. We do have size guidelines for that in the help center, or you can pop me a message and I'll be happy to give you those. But that just sits at the top there. If you've got the title of your podcast on that image, you can turn this text overlay off as well, just because you're not going to want the two titles overlapping each other. You have the subscribe button here. When your podcast is available on places like Apple, Spotify, etc., that will roll down and show all those different options as well as soon as it's live. Share podcast gives your listeners a few different ways of sharing the podcast to their friends. So Twitter, Facebook, LinkedIn, email, and we've popped the link there as well, just in case we've missed any options out there. You can connect up some social media, as you can see here. So this you can all set up in that little section I was just on 2 seconds ago. And also you can connect up some donation links. So if you have a Patreon set up, for example, you can connect that up and those buttons will just sit over on the left here normally. About is just the description of your podcast. So that just sits there so your listeners can see what it's all about. And you've got your episode list here. If someone were to click on an episode to listen to it, they do get the option to play or download the episode for listening later on. They get the description of the episode and they also get the next episode. So it encourages them to keep listening, which I'm sure is what we all want, those lovely download numbers. So that's how it stands at the moment. But as I said, we are working on an update for podcast pages, which is going to be really exciting and they look amazing. So worth keeping your eyes open for that one. And finally is the embeddable subscribe button. So this is a button for your website that you can just embed directly into the website. And it pretty much does exactly the same as the subscribe button on the podcast page. So once your podcast is live in all those different directories, they will appear as options down here. At the moment, I only have RSS feed for this one because it's not public. You can change between a dark and a light theme for the button and change the color of the word subscribe to whatever you'd like. And then when people come to your website and they want to subscribe to the podcast, they'll go to this button and on hover, whatever options you've picked will display on the button so they can click through to Apple Podcasts, for example, and subscribe really easily on whatever platform suits them best. And that's pretty much it for the little rundown of how it all works.
Cool. All right. Thanks, Laura.
Yeah.
So let's just get started with some of the questions then. So while you were doing that little demo, we had a question from Dari who said, we don't seem to have the audiogram feature on ours, and same with transcriptions. So the audiogram and transcription are available on all of our platform, all the plans, unless you joined us with AppSumo.
Yeah.
So if you did join us with AppSumo, there is an add-on for that. But if you message Laura, then she can get that sorted for you and get that included.
You can actually sort that within your own account now. So you don't need to message me. I mean, you can if you get stuck, obviously. But if you want to sort it within your own account, you literally just click your little icon in the top right and then account settings. And in there, there'll be a little, I think it's a purple window on the right-hand side. And it just says, do you want the add-on? You just click the button and follow the process through, and that'll help you set up payment for that.
Cool. Okay, so another question we got was Scott from the Ageless Grind podcast. He says, I put my podcast together a year ago and did a couple of episodes of just me talking, and now it has stalled. How can I build up interviews and my brand? Well, one of the ways you can build up interviews is by joining Matchmaker. So this is a new platform we have recently launched alongside Podcast.co. And I will talk you through it now if Graham will share. There we go. So as you can see here, this is the Matchmaker app. So as soon as you created your account, you'll see this. This is the homepage. It's split between the latest shows that we've got here and the latest guests. So you can see who the most recent people who have just joined are and reach out to them as soon as they've got here. But if you are a podcaster and you're looking for a guest, you just click this Find a Guest button. And here you can see a rundown of all the different guests that we have. So if we scroll down, you can see there are 78 pages. So we do have quite a lot of people on here at the moment. But if you want to narrow it down specifically, we have the categories here. Now, these are all defined by the iTunes categories for your podcast. So let's just say you have a podcast based on your hobbies. We apply the filters. And these are all the guests we have that are hobby-based podcasters. Now, obviously, that's quite a vague one, so you can narrow it down further. Podcasts based on books. And again, these are going to be people who have written a book, read books, just like books. But we can narrow it down even further again. We can do it based on country. So let's just say for ease, I want to speak to someone who is in the same country as me, so it's the same time zone. We do that. And here we go. So this is narrowed down even further. So these are all the UK-based podcasters who have podcasts or can talk about books. But again, there's a lot of categories here, and there's a lot of people on the platform. So you're guaranteed to find someone who's right for you. If you want to find a show to appear on, though, you do the same thing. Click Find a Show. And these are all the different podcasts that we've got joined us on Matchmaker. So there are 48 pages of these. There's loads of different podcasts that you can appear on. And again, it's the same thing, same categories, location data, and you can also do it based on language as well if you want to do a different language podcast. And then the additional filters, we have the option to make your profile unavailable. So if you want to avoid the people who aren't available to appear on your podcast, just click that one. And then the guest format, most people are going to be remote at the moment with everything that's happening. Recently as well, we've added the favorites list. So what you do here is, if I really enjoy speaking to Mike here, what I do is I just click add to favorites. And here he is in my favorites list. So if there's people I like being on my podcast or having podcasts with, you can favorite them, and then it's just easier to find them. And again, let's just say I wanted to message Mike. Click contact guest. It does come up with a pre-filled out message here for you, just so it's a bit easier. But if you did want to make it more personal, which I would recommend, you're going to get a lot more responses if you do. You just delete that and then send your message to them. That's simple. And then all your messages just appear here. And that is just a very brief rundown of Matchmaker, but it's incredibly easy to use. And I highly recommend it as a way to get more guests on your podcast and cross-promote your podcast on other podcasts, and again, vice versa. You both gain something from it that way. You gain the promotion from being on someone else's podcast, they gain it from being on yours. It's a win-win situation. So that's probably the easiest way to build up interviews and your brand, is just by appearing on other podcasts.
Definitely.
Okay, next question is from Mr. X. He says, what makes Podcast.co different from other places like Buzzsprout?
I love that name. So I think each hosting platform kind of has its own unique points. So really it's a matter of looking at every single one and working out what's the best fit for what you want to do. In terms of what we do differently, as far as I'm aware, people can correct me if I'm wrong on this. Last check I did, I don't think they do the audiogram transcription bits. So that's definitely something that we have. The one thing we get complimented on more than anything, not to toot my own horn, but the support time. The support desk is manned between 9 and 5:30 UK time. So if you message anywhere between that time, you're going to get a pretty quick response. If it's outside of that time, I usually get back to people as soon as I can the next working day. So that's something we tend to get complimented on a lot. And also the fact we offer like the in-person demo calls and consultancy calls as well, if you just need a bit of advice, or a lot of them turn into they just need a bit of reassurance, which I completely get. So yeah, I'd say that's probably something that we offer that a lot of other hosting platforms don't offer.
Okay, cool. So Martin Chan says, what advice can you give on doing video podcasting? Audio is great, but sometimes I feel to reach a bigger audience, making a video, doing podcast will help a lot. So video podcast, obviously if you're uploading it to YouTube at the same time as your regular podcast, you are going to increase your audience quite a bit. The only downside is that you can't actually link it to your podcast, if that makes sense. So, because the podcast is based on your RSS feed, there's no way to connect your listener data or download data or anything like that when it's on video. But as a completely separate thing, it is a great way to increase your audience more. You just have to track it yourself. But in terms of actually doing it, it's really simple. All you need to do is say, we're doing a podcast remotely. if me and Laura were doing one right now, all we would do is just record ourselves on our laptops or computers or whatever, and then splice the video together, and that's it. And you can do that in most of the different like chat things now. I think you can record in Zoom, can't you, and Google Meet. So it's really easy to do.
The one advantage to recording with Zoom for that type of thing is I believe that Zoom allows local recording. So if you turn that on, it allows you to record from your computer microphone and them to record from their computer microphone, which will give you better quality audio. So you can then reuse the audio as the podcast audio, instead of having a really complicated process to get the audio together.
I think Skype has that. But yeah, so it's really easy. If you did want to be more high profile with it, then just buy a simple camera and just record your video that way. Record the audio separately, obviously, and then just merge them together.
Yeah.
But yeah, very easy to do. I'm sure Graham's going to put some links in the comments here because we have a few articles based on video podcasting, so he should make it a bit easier for you to understand. Cool. So Ronald Hunt has said, how can I receive sponsors for my podcast? So sponsorship is all based on your current listener data. The bigger audience you have, the easier it is for you to get a sponsor. It's not impossible to get sponsorship with smaller audiences, but it is a lot more difficult. Yeah. So what you need to do first is just make sure you have got the downloads. I think it's around 10,000 a month, is it, generally?
Yeah, our sponsorship program requires you to have 10,000 per month before we can sort of look into that for you, because that's just really what companies ask for. Yeah. But like Daryl said, it's not impossible to get, especially if you can talk to sort of local businesses to where you are. Probably more likely to say yes. But if you're trying to approach like bigger brands and stuff, definitely wait until you have a significant audience before approaching them.
Yeah, and again, if you're doing quite a niche podcast, then there's going to be niche companies that want to advertise with you as well. So even if you think that you're a bit too small to get sponsorship right now, if you are in that kind of obscure category, then they're going to see it as a way to increase their audience. And yeah, the best thing you can do is just reach out to different companies and ask, because if you don't ask, then you'll never know, will you?
Exactly.
Cool. Scott from the Voice of Jones County podcast says, best and easiest to use file transfer software for novices?
I'm a bit confused by that question. I'm assuming it's something along the lines of, you're expecting an answer something along the lines of a program like FileZilla, in which case that doesn't actually link up with Podcast.co at the moment. You can use, we have an integration with Zapier. So you can use that to create a link between a Google Drive folder or a Dropbox folder and Podcast.co. So anything you throw into those folders will automatically get uploaded to your Unlisted section in Podcast.co, and then you can fill out the title and description bits once it's in. That's probably what I'd recommend if you're trying to use something there with Podcast.co.
Yeah, I mean, if you are just asking, if you're recording two different bits of audio remotely and you want to send them to each other instead of just doing it via email, I'd just recommend using WeTransfer, just because it's a free to use platform. But yeah, if it was that, then Laura's answer will help you. If it's not, then yeah. If there's any follow-up questions, just send us an email.
Yeah.
We've got another question here. It says, tracking understanding better, what some of the information means and how to use it to find specific people who listen. So based on analytics stuff, how can you find more information about who's listening to your podcast?
On analytics?
Within the app, yeah.
So the analytics that we have in the platform at the moment are just the total and unique downloads, what country your listeners are coming from, and what platform they're using to listen to the podcast. If you're after more specific information like age, gender, that kind of stuff, we can't provide that within the dashboard, because the reason certain platforms like Spotify can is because people have to log in to access that content, and that information about age and gender is attached to the people's accounts. Obviously, with most platforms, people don't have to log in. So not every platform provides that data, so we don't provide it within the dashboard. If you want to get access to the Spotify data, it's actually really easy. They've done a whole process that just makes it so easy. You go to podcasters.spotify.com, sign in or create an account there, and then follow their claiming process through. It literally takes a couple of minutes. And then you'll get access to all of that data as well.
Cool. Okay, we've got another question here from Thomas from the FOMO show. How do I go mainstream by myself? So what if you wanted to get more of an audience, I assume? There's a few different ways you can do it. So as we mentioned, appearing on other podcasts is one great way to do it. Another really easy way to gain more of an audience is just through social media. Just promote your own show across social media. There's loads of different groups on Facebook that you can join where you can cross promote. You just share your podcast link in there and then get listeners that way. Or just join a group that's based on what your podcast is about. So if you have like a podcast about different cake, join a cake group on Facebook, and then start talking about your podcast. So yeah, it's just all about how you advertise yourself across social. The more you do, the more audience you're going to get. I mean, it's hard to do at first. You feel a bit awkward, but
yeah,
everyone's doing it. So don't feel bad about self-promotion.
Yeah. What I would add to that as well is please don't be one of those people that just posts when a new episode happens and nothing else.
Yeah.
Podcaster communities really like to be a community, and they like to feel that they're involved. So if you just post, hey, here's my new episode, and nothing else, people aren't going to communicate with you. You're not going to have that conversation there. If you can add bits in between, so if you had that podcast about cake, for example, you could post a tweet of just saying, like, we're feeling peckish, what's your favorite cake?
Yeah.
It gets people talking, it creates a conversation, and it creates a community feel to the podcast, so people feel like they're really part of something, and that tends to work really well as well.
Yeah, the best thing you can do is just engage whenever you can, just talk to your community. If you don't have a community yet, latch onto someone else's and talk to them that way.
Yeah.
Cool. Have we got any more questions coming in? So we have one here. Where can I get a license to play music in my podcast? This is a really tricky one to answer because there are different laws based in different places. It's a bit of an area.
It is. It's a very grey area. Unfortunately, a lot of radio licensing that's available or broadcast licenses, they don't cover on-demand stuff. So that includes podcasts because they're downloadable and on-demand by their very nature. So unfortunately, it's not really recommended to use copyright music in your podcast at all if you can help it. Especially with certain directories over recent months, they've really been cracking down on it. Spotify, for example, have really been cracking down on it and just completely wiping podcasts with copyright music off the platform. So I really would not recommend it unless you're willing to chance getting taken down. But I mean, if anybody knows of podcast licensing that's out there that does actually cover you, that would be interesting, as I'm not aware of any.
Okay, so we've got another one here. What podcast directories do you distribute to?
Ooh, that's a good one. See if I can remember these off the top of my head. We do Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Spotify, Stitcher, Deezer, Acast, Pocket Casts, TuneIn. Oh, and we do iHeartRadio, but that one is by request. So if you're on Podcast.co, we haven't distributed your podcast to iHeart. feel free to drop us a message and we'll get stuck into that one. The only reason that one's on demand is because it can take up to 2 weeks for that one to go through. They have a very intensive process, so we just like to be able to keep track of that one a little bit on a more personal basis.
Yeah. Okay, cool. I believe, unless there's any more, that's all the questions we have for this one. So we are going to be doing these fairly regularly now, so we're going to do them every month. So the next one we do will be, let me just double check the date. It will be the 27th of August, so we're just going to do them on the last Thursday of the month. So if you do have any more questions between now and then, feel free to just drop us a message. You can email us help@podcast.co. Or if you sign into the app, then you can just open the chat widget and get to Laura directly that way. But if that's it for now, make sure you check out Matchmaker.fm. Start connecting with other people, cross-promote, get on more podcasts, get more listeners. But yeah, I think that's it for this week. So thanks for listening, everyone. Hopefully we've answered some of your questions. Hopefully it was helpful.
Hey, before you go anywhere, I have a quick question for you. Do you have a podcast? And if you do you want to book more interesting, high-profile guests on your show? Well, if you answered yes to either of these questions, I'd love to invite you to come and join our community over at Matchmaker.fm. Matchmaker is a service that connects awesome podcasts just like yours with incredible and high-profile guests that make for really interesting conversations. It's really straightforward to get started and completely free to sign up. Just connect using your LinkedIn, Facebook or Google account, and then you can begin connecting with guests based on their area of expertise, location, and much more. If you haven't checked it out already, go to matchmaker.fm, get started. It's just like Tinder, but for podcasters.